within, a month, I was astounded at how I felt. I hadn't felt this way in 7 years. My mental clarity came back. That was an uncomfortable symptom. Like I could pay attention again. My brain was working.
Greg, I'm super excited to be chatting today. When we have these sort of conversations with patients/clients, there's always a few objectives I have. The main one, or the main couple, I guess, are providing hope, but also insights, right? Because I don't want to just make this like hey, tell everyone how great you're feeling. That's nice, and I think that's going to provide a ray of light for some people who are struggling. Yes, totally. But there's also lessons that if we can share, hopefully other people can apply them and improve how they're feeling. So what I wanted to do today was just start with sort of what you were struggling with so people can sort of identify the brain fog, the fatigue, the loose bowels, right? I'll give you the floor on that in a moment. Some of the prior treatments and doctors and diagnoses you went through, again, understanding people will probably resonate with, I've been through some of that myself. What we uncovered, kind of what our hypotheses were, and we'll share some data. By the way, thank you for filling out one of those or two of those forms, because we have a really cool pre-post graph that quantifies your improvements over time. And then any tips that you want to sort of close with that you took away from this process together. Starting off with the symptoms, this wouldn't be an exhaustive list, but certainly these are enough. And I'd love to have you expand upon this. Brain fog, fatigue, especially fatigue after meals, which can be a little bit of a red herring that the main issue is in the gut. And in your case, partially gut, but definitely some stuff very impactful outside of the gut, but that was causing these gut symptoms. Mood issues, fluctuations, and then loose bowels.
Yeah.
Give us kind of the prelude to before we started working together.
Sure. Yeah. It makes sense to give a brief health history to kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
As a kid, I was not so healthy, kind of lived in a house that had fleas and stray cats. And as time went on, I generally got more healthy towards college. And
it's kind of ironic, right? Usually it's the opposite.
Yeah. And I was very active in college, mountain biking, rock climbing, just a very active individual, used to a lot of energy and just, an exciting life. And at the age of 26, I was about to get married. And a week before my marriage, I got diagnosed with Lyme disease. I was bedridden for about 3 days and couldn't figure it out. I actually took a few doctors. When I then fortunately got a doxycycline, I was able to participate in my wedding and go on my honeymoon. It was a little bit off still, still recovering, but I went away. I seemed like I was fine. And about a year later, I developed IBS. Doctor tells me that's what it is. A lot of people have it, not much you can do. That was before low FODMAP was popular, so they didn't have any advice for me except maybe take peppermint oil capsules. And, all right, the IBS was a bummer, but I was okay, until my son was born. And that was a great time in my life, but there was a lot of stress there. I was sleep deprived. I was still exercising probably too hard for the lack of, and, I'm in college. So, I still like to have a few, beers, most nights, things like that. And I just started to feel crummy and wasn't really self-aware at that point. Went on to move to our new house, and then I really started to feel crummy, fatigue, just like feeling physically run down, mentally run down, poor mood, just terrible mood. Got, diagnosed with a light form of depression by my doctor. And, loose bowels, couldn't get them into control. And it was rough, and so I couldn't live like that anymore,
Right.
And so I did what anyone could do at that time. I went online and found influencers who I could follow. So, it was kind of this self-led effort of trying to improve myself. I was all about diet and lifestyle. Doctors haven't been able to help me. So, I tried what I say, everything. I tried this low-lactic diet. I went, started seeing a therapist to handle the emotional side of things. I exercised more, took probiotics, did these deep manifestations, B vitamins, maybe I had NTHFR gene problem, sodium butyrate, like keto, paleo. I can just keep going down the list. Dial in my sleep hygiene, blue blocking glasses, just anything I could find that could potentially make me feel better. And none of it really did. it was all great things. I really helped hone in the lifestyle. And so I'm grateful for that. But it never really moved the needle
Maybe like
until,
small flickers, but nothing substantial. Yeah.
yeah, be a small flicker here and there.
Yep.
But
Yep.
overall, like, why won't this go away? Then I learned about antimicrobials. And I tried just basic wormwood from Herb Farm, a couple drops according to the directions. And for the first time after it was actually a few years, it's like, oh, this supplement actually helps a little bit.
Mm.
And so that started about a couple of years of self-led trial and error with different antimicrobial blends. And they would work for a few months. I had great cure. Yeah, I knew it's microbiome, and then stop working. And I get fatigued and brain fog, like to a point where I couldn't pay attention at work. I used to be smart. Now I felt stupid.
Mm.
I was starting to get down on myself because of it. And so I was on this roller coaster of antimicrobials working, trying and blend, trying and blend. And I kind of stopped, everything would stop working.
Right.
And I got to a point in the winter of February of 23 where, like I said, I kind of fell off the cliff. I just ended up getting these gnarly symptoms of multiple sclerosis. It was scary. I thought I was going to die. Like my hand is shaky. I can see it in my handwriting. I was losing my balance on flat ground. I had to hold on to a railing going down stairs for fear of my legs buckling because they were weak. Rashes popping up on my face, horrible digestion. I could go on and on. And so I had a brain scan done, and I don't have MS. So I was kind of shocked, but very glad. That's not a diagnosis that I want.
Sure.
And so I was convinced this was just microbiome. I have autoimmune markers, things that flare out of control. And so I kind of, at that point, almost like for myself said, all right, I'm going to lead a life of decline. I'm just going to do the best I can and hold on. And then when I need to go on immune suppressing drugs, who knows what's going to happen. Scared.
Oh, and by the way, if this is helpful, please comment. I'm always curious to engage. Subscribe so you see future videos from us, and share with someone you think this might help.
And so I got a protocol called Briggs Protocol. I found it online. It's a PhD physicist who had ulcerative colitis, developed his own protocol based on research he did. And it was antimicrobials, immune support, nutrients, And on top of that, I did bought this Myriah app for hypnosis of IBS. And, I do emotional work, this German new medicine thing. And I threw the kitchen sink at it. And most of the symptoms, the MS symptoms, went away, but they were kind of lingering in the background. Legs were better, but still weak. Bowels were still terrible, but a little better. Fatigue was better, in and out day to day. But I was okay with that. I was better than having those terrible symptoms. But that only worked for about 6 months, and it stopped working again. And I had been listening to your podcast for a while at that time. And, maybe 6-8 months prior, started talking about Vector-Borne. That was really resonating with me. I've been bitten by a bunch of ticks, which I didn't mention in the story. I've had numerous tick-borne illnesses. And you explained, Vector-Borne illness in a way that I hadn't heard before. I'd heard of Lyme disease, but I'm like, I never bought into it. So I'm like, how are people, in Texas or in parts of the country where Lyme's present getting Lyme disease? That makes no sense to me. But so I said, that's it. I've been wanting to reach out for years at this point. I finally did. And so you identified, Candida, first of all, as we started with the microbiome thing. Candida, I thought I had SIBO. All right, do a low carb diet, fine. I'm willing to do anything at that point. That moved the needle. I didn't think it would, but it started feeling better. But about 8-10 weeks later, again, like always, started fading off. And I started feeling funny. I felt fatigue after eating coming back. No mood slitting. And so gave me an option. We can hammer a little bit more on Candida, or let's try this Vector-Borne illness history supports that you have symptoms that suggest Vector-Borne illness. Other things I forgot to mention. My feet have been numb for 3 years at this point. Numb. That's a weird one. My muscles were twitching. I never heard those symptoms from microbiome stuff, SIBO or fungal overgrowth.
Key point. Yep.
Yeah. And so I decided, all right, let's try these supplements without the testing. I figured I'd rather spend a few $100s on supplements, and if it works, great. And if it doesn't, okay, that would be cheaper than testing. I'm just that kind of person. And within, a month, I was astounded at how I felt. I hadn't felt this way in 7 years. My mental clarity came back. That was an untouchable symptom. Like I could pay attention again. My brain was working.
Yeah.
My feet started to wake up. They were numb. That was an untouchable symptom. Nothing I had done had helped defeat, and they started to come back to life. And, I had just endless energy. I mean, I'm almost 39 years old. And, at times I was feeling like I was 80 years old, but now I feel like I have more strength and energy than I've ever had in my life. Because I've kept up with, the healthy diet, the exercise, the sleep hygiene. Like I never let go of any of that. And once we hit what seems to be, one of the root causes being this vector-borne illness, which I had never hit on before. Like I felt hopeful for life, and my mood was like I had this peace and serenity at home that I had never had before. Like I was kind of grumpy and just like loving life, and so now it's just we're still hitting on it. I might be feeling die-off symptoms and things like some weeks are great, some are a little bit more rough, but it's profound for me. It's been life, and I'm so grateful for it because I thought I was doomed.
Yeah, yeah. I've got so much there to respond to. Let me try to work through it because again, that's I think just chock full of lessons for people. Um, Trying to take them in order. The regular dose of antimicrobials, what you'll see on the labels. I've really over the past 6 months developed this intuition, and I've discussed this with other colleagues who treat similar conditions. It's just not going to be adequate for most people. Maybe their first go round or two. And what you do is you kind of push down some of the free living organisms, you kind of wipe those away. But the ones that are more resistant or in biofilms, it just doesn't seem sufficient. And this is a conversation I recently had with a patient who said, boy, the dose you're recommending is like 3, 4, 5 times higher than what's on the label. And so it's understandable, I think, to check in, but I want to keep issuing this reminder to people just to help them understand that what manufacturers put on the label is always going to be the lowest liability, low dose they can put out there. So one component, one lesson, one pearl here is with these chronic organisms, we tend to have to be more aggressive, which I've said before is different than the gut. With the gut, it tends to be this sort of self-propagating, as you start healing the gut, you get more healing and a light touch and sort of its own momentum is able to carry it forward. Conversely, when there's a chronic vector-borne infection, that's when you see this pattern of improvement, regression. And I suspect, as you sort of hinted at, there's a subset of people who are attributing this to SIBO, and they haven't fully made the connection yet that SIBO-like symptoms can be caused by these organisms that mainly hang out in the blood, but also disrupt blood flow to the gut, hence part of where some of these symptoms come from, and then can also impact autonomic nervous system intervention to the gut, and therefore things like motility and peristalsis. The impact of nutrients, like you mentioned, doing some of the nutrient work, some of the diet work, some of the lifestyle interventions can all help. But, coming back to that flicker of improvement or temporary response, another indicator that there's probably a chronic infection of some sort present. Candida seems to be more common with this sort of presentation. I think it's because these organisms suppress the immune system, and Candida is an opportunist. So as soon as your immune system is suppressed, Candida likes to proliferate. But just treating the Candida is going to be insufficient because it's not the main cause. It's a little bit more of a secondary issue. But we work through that kind of in a sequence. Maybe Candida treatment alone is enough. And if it is, your body will tell us, right? And after a month or two on the Candida plan, you'll say, yeah, I'm feeling great. I'm stable. I'm steady, or not. Also, to your point, there's a lot of, in my view, misconceptions about Lyme. And I think this is a carryover from the understanding about Lyme from maybe 10 years ago. But a lot of the rules now are different. And we'll share on the screen this great survey by IGeneX. This is looking at 10,000 test samples, and they found 37% of people had Babesia. What's interesting about Babesia is it's not a bacteria. It's treated totally differently, and it wouldn't test positive if you're testing for Lyme or the Borrelia bacteria. And also, again, if someone did Lyme antibiotics like doxycycline, that actually doesn't really help Babesia. So some of where I think the confusion comes from is people had only a partial diagnosis prior. They may have missed Babesia, again, clocking in at 37%, and then looking at Borrelia, it's actually less common, 32%. So just that right there tells us that, boy, we might be missing an organism that's treated differently. And this might account for why some people say, well, I went to a Lyme doctor, I did aggressive antibiotics, saw some improvement, but it wasn't full, in part because they weren't hitting this other organism, the protozoa, Babesia, that's treated a little bit differently, in some cases quite a bit differently. The other thing I wanted to share, just to keep tying some data to this really nice study by Erdman, he found that when people had 3 or more chronic symptoms, about 50% or a little higher tested positive for a vector-borne infection. So what he essentially found was in these people with chronicity seemed to be the real issue. Or if there's these chronic symptoms and there's more than 3, then it's a coin toss, 50-50, if one of these vector-borne microbes is present. The die-off piece is interesting because when we last followed up in the clinic, you reported all these improvements, and I said, "Did you have any die-off?" You said, "No, it felt great." And I remarked, "Wow, like you're one of the lucky ones." But so it seems now that you're a little farther in, you're having some die-off, which I also want to flag for people and kind of put another principle out there. And this has been a huge gift coaching people through this in the clinic, because people like yourself who are so well-read, so educated, they'll start onto a treatment in some cases, have something like joint pain, fatigue or brain fog, and go, oh, maybe it's the sulfur in the supplement or the salicylates or the whatever, right? And they stop. And helping people to try and identify this arc of, I feel crappy for a little bit, then I feel better. And, I come to a higher level of health. There's another arc of feeling a little bit lousy. And there might be a series of those arcs over time as either the bacteria or the protozoa go from sort of dormancy to activity. And so they're going from dormant to active, but now they're going to active phase with all these antimicrobials in your system. And so they get zapped essentially, and you have that die-off. Or when a biofilm breaks open, and it's another, I think, key component, are agents that will break down the biofilm. So that also accounts for why you may 2 weeks from now notice there's 3, 4, 5 days of feeling kind of cruddy, because we're rooting out some of those bacteria that before were a little bit sort of in this hibernating biofilm state. And now, we're getting deeper and deeper into where seeds of this infection essentially are hiding. So just a few things that I think people should be aware of. Let me take a quick moment and share some of your pre-post data, because there's always 2 voices, and I'm sure you can identify with this, Greg. Like you have on any issue, there's that one voice in your head that will say something akin to, "Oh, great, let's do it." And the other side that's kind of skeptical and says, "Well, I don't know, maybe this is BS," right? So, okay, open on the one hand, but then there's a filter of skepticism on the other. So that's why we've been quantifying with these questionnaires, because at least these questionnaires have been subjected to scrutiny by other scientists to see if they're at least going to be an acceptably accurate way of tracking symptoms over time. Because it's not super accurate just to say, how are you feeling? It gives us a sense, right? But it's not rigorous. So in your case, and thank you for filling these out, at baseline, what we're looking at here is the Vector-Borne Microbe Severity Score, or the MSIDS. This is from Richard Horowitz, and it stands for Multiple System Inflammatory Disease Syndrome. So it's really just quantifying all of the systemic inflammation, like you mentioned before. There's brain fog, there's tingling and numbness, there's bowel issues, right? So it's multi-system inflammation. But your initial score was 39. And then about 3 months later, three months later, you're at a 28. So the higher this score is, the more severe your symptoms are. So from 39 to 28. So that's a great drop in the severity. And correspondingly, we're pairing this with what's known as a PROMIS 10, another validated peer-reviewed inventory, this time looking at your quality of life. And look at this, you go from a 38 to a 49. So the higher the score here, the higher quality of life. So there's a perfectly inverse relationship to disease activity scores dropping, quality of life going up.
Yeah.
Probably not anything
The
beyond the
questionnaire,
obvious, but just to state that we're trying to bring some scientific rigor to how we track this. Yeah, please.
it's very helpful. When I was trying to self-diagnose, I would, there's a lot of overlapping symptoms. So, now I honed in on SIBO for my symptoms. And the SIBO treatments I had been hammering on never worked. Well, 5-minute diet did essentially nothing for me. But when I filled out those questionnaires, the SIBO, the Candida questionnaire, the Vector-Borne illness questionnaire, it became quite obvious, what my symptoms were correlating to. It was like, oh, Candida, yeah, Vector-Borne illness. Okay, I guess it's not SIBO. I can let go of that and just, trust in that process. So it's very
Yeah,
helpful.
that's another great point in terms of, and I hadn't even really thought about it through that frame of helping the person maybe let go of a prior diagnosis. In fact, I had the same
Mhm.
conversation yesterday in the clinic with a woman who was quite convinced sulfur intolerance was her issue. And as we've been doing some vector-borne infection treatment with her, she's bringing sulfur foods back into her diet and noticing that she's fine. And so I've had to kind of interrupt her a few times and challenge her politely to sort of challenge the hypothesis that sulfur is the problem because she's really gone onto a very restrictive diet underneath the sulfur hypothesis, but she's still having all these symptoms, or at least she was, right? So to your point, the questionnaire can help people cue in on and really quantify, because again, to your point, there's so much overlap that anyone with 6 symptoms could look at a list of SIBO symptoms and say, that's me. But if we can quantify a SIBO inventory, a Candida inventory, a vector-borne illness inventory, and you can see how you score, it can be really revealing. Yes, it's a
Yeah.
great point.
And then the other benefit I noticed with the follow-up questionnaires is, tracking my progress with time. It's so easy for me to hone in on what's wrong. If I'm experiencing some die-off symptoms, in my mind, I'm freaking out. Like, oh, I'm not getting better. But then I fill up a follow-up question and it's like, oh, well, during a flare-up, actually, my brain's working better now. My feet are still much less numb than they used to be.
Yeah.
I said, oh, there's other symptoms that have gotten a lot better. Some of and so it gives me some context to continue seeing the improvement
Absolutely.
objectively rather than subjectively in my mind.
Absolutely. And again, for our audience, I'll just echo that trying to unlearn pulling back from a negative reaction, because I think we've all been fairly well educated from research and especially SIBO and just sort of elimination diets, that if you put something in your body and you have a negative response, that's a bad thing. And that's not always the case, right? And sure, there's going to be exceptions. If you notice every time you have dairy, you have diarrhea, okay, we should heed that warning. But let's say you use different antimicrobials, cinnamon versus oregano versus garlic versus methylene blue, and they all elicit a negative response. It's extremely likely it's not a intolerance to all of those different agents, but the commonality of them causing death of microbes and therefore die off. So just another
Yeah.
thing for people to be thinking about.
And that added evolution in my thinking has been very helpful because I would always associate symptoms with bad. And
Right.
so when symptoms come up, I get scared. I, abandon what's not working and jump ship and try something entirely new. And all that stress and fear associated with symptoms was not helping me. And now if I'm working on it, it's getting better. It's a work in progress, but seeing symptoms now as, feedback or potential improvement. So now when I get symptoms like, okay, I think this is a good thing. I think this is die off. I'm just going to breathe and relax through this. I'm not going to freak out. I have someone guiding me through this. Like it's going to be okay. And that shift in mindset has been incredibly helpful
Good.
as well.
Good. Well said. Yeah, it's just, I think, a concept that's really important for people to understand so that they don't pull back, because now that we have this awareness, we're seeing this pattern in so many people where they've been sort of knocking on the door of the therapeutic realm that could cause improvements, but every time they have a negative symptom, they pull back. And the devil's advocate thing I wanted to say was, some people will be treated for Lyme, let's say like in more of the historic treatment paradigm, and they'll remark, well, I did the treatment for a year and I felt no different. That in my mind tells us that, okay, then we're not doing the right thing. But as Henry Lindner said in a prior podcast, any change, good or bad, is significant. Meaning if it's bad, it's die off, but we know that we're fighting the battle, right? And if it's improvement, obviously it's good. So I would say important to clarify, no change tells us we're probably not doing the right thing. But either improvement or a flaring tells us we are doing the right thing. It's kind of paradoxical, but it can go either way.
Right.
So a few of the things specifically, as we sort of went on to this more aggressive antimicrobial protocol, we used a higher dose of oregano, clove, cinnamon, artemisia, cryptolepis, methylene blue, which I become just more and more impressed with methylene blue in terms of it can really put people on their butts. This is where we've seen some of the most notable die-off. And as one other example for our audience, we had another gentleman who his main manifestation of die-off was an elevated heart rate and elevated blood pressure. So he was monitored with his local cardiologist. We went slow and steady. But again, he had seen a similar reaction to artemisia also. So we started piecing together the bugs in this case. This gentleman had prior confirmation of Bartonella, are probably impacting your autonomic nervous system, which they're known to do. And so as you're causing inflammation where they're residing and you're impacting the ANS, that's likely what's leading to the elevations of blood pressure and your pulse rate. Now, we also screened with the G6PD test because it's really important people do not go on a high dose of methylene blue without doing the simple blood test, just to make sure it's not something that might be damaging to their system. Nattokinase and Bacopa as anti-biofilm agents, and then some immune supports, astragalus, andrographis, cat's claw. That's a decent arsenal. Methylene blue, oregano, clove, cinnamon, artemisia, cryptolepis, nattokinase, Bacopa, andrographis, astragalus, cat's claw. Not in one combination formula, right? But separate. And I think we had this conversation of, well, Greg, the sense I'm getting is in this realm of treatment, it's opposite to the sort of conservative light touch gastrointestinal care. We got to be more aggressive. And you were on board. And certainly, I mean, the proof's in the pudding, so to speak, in terms of, how you're feeling.
Yeah. I thought I was on a lot of supplements before, but I'm on a lot more now, but it was worth it for sure because this is some of the stuff I've never tried before, and particularly the methylene blue, which was really the only thing that did give me some die-off symptoms, which just, lasted, a week and have since went away. But it's been, incredibly helpful. And I think it's worth mentioning some of these supplements, they come in, tincture form, and they can become kind of pricey. So I've learned that I can actually buy high quality herbs and I've been making my own tinctures, which seem to have been equally as effective for me. It's key to find a good supplier, someone who's reputable, not just off Amazon, but that's an option that I've been pursuing as well.
Yeah, I commend you for sort of taking notes from your herbalist friend and making your own homebrew, so to speak.
Okay, yes.
And I'll second that. As we've been really digging into this, the difference in potency across brands is pretty remarkable, especially with tinctures. The concentration ratio can be anywhere from 1-to-1, so 1 part plant to 1 part extract concentrated, or diluted 1-to-5, 1 part plant to 5 parts extract. So this is another thing where I think if one of the rules of this game is we have to be adequately strong or aggressive, then this is where looking for the cheapest herb online, you may do a full dropper full, and that full dropper full might be the equivalent of like 3 drops of something that's more potent. So if you end up doing a full dropper of the potent versus a full dropper of the not potent, the delta in the concentration and in the efficacy is going to be substantial. And this is an ongoing project for us. We're really digging into this, but the first evolution was what agents work the best. The second evolution is who has the best products. And that's sort of what we're evolving into now to try to bring together the strongest.
I'm always being cognizant of that as well, because, there are also a lot of companies who might just put, the good companies will put, if you're using capsules, say extract in a capsule, and that might be what you want. Other companies who are less expensive are just putting, herb powder, much weaker formulation, and you don't know the quality of it. And so it's something I've been very key on is getting high quality.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's because that seems to be incredibly important.
I was having this conversation with a friend of mine the other day, trying to sort of see both sides and say, well, maybe there's a person out there who has very, very mild symptoms and a inexpensive sort of Amazon purchase multi-ingredient formula would be enough to kind of get them over the hump. So I'm open to that use case, but for someone like you who's just doing everything, right? I mean, that list from before of all of the things you're doing for your health and still not feeling well, that's when, in my opinion, we want to really come in with the big guns on this and not fiddle around with, the
Yeah.
more general population. You can buy it, wherever, and not going to have that clinical potency.
Yeah, one of the other things I've been keen on is tinctures. Some of these compounds are not very water soluble, and so the bioavailability of tinctures, I think, is much higher than, say, some extracts of things like crystal lepis or endographis or similar things that have fat soluble components. That if we were to take just extracts and not a tincture form, I'm worried I wouldn't absorb a lot of it. But I know when it's dissolved in an alcohol tincture, the bioavailability is much higher. So I've made sure to stick with those for those
Yeah, I mean
particular
the details
compounds.
here matter, including the dose, and underneath the umbrella of dose would be potency. So 100%. Anything that you want to comment on from this last round? I know we haven't had a chance to follow up in the clinic since we introduced a few detox supports like modified citrus pectin, psyllium for binding bile in the gut, liver gallbladder support, glutathione. Anything there interesting that you want to share with people?
Yeah, one of the things you had me start taking was the modified citrus pectin, which I understand correctly absorbs into the bloodstream and helps dissolve, plaques and, I don't know the terminology, but I've noticed, I think with that one in particular, I feel warmer in general. I used to be a relatively cold person. I always
Mm.
attributed it to poor circulation, but now I'm finding myself taking off my sweater, and it's winter here in Massachusetts and it's cold. I wear a sweater all winter long, even sometimes in the summer, but now that I'm walking around with short sleeves in the
Nice.
office and at home. So that's been one thing. My feet have gotten a little better in terms of numbness. And interestingly, I wear an Oura ring. I track my sleep, and one of the things it tracks is cardiovascular age. And I don't know if this is from the modified citrus pectin lifestyle, but it seemed to happen when I started taking that. My cardiovascular age got better, which I thought was interesting because I think modified citrus pectin can help, improve cardiovascular health by dissolving plaques in the, arteries. And I think the native kinase would help with that as well. So I'm not sure which one, but I thought it was an interesting correlation. But so that's up there. The glutathione has certainly helped my sleep. I was waking up at, I was not waking up, but tossing and turning starting around 3 a.m. And you said, oh, that might be, due to, needing to detox. And so glutathione has been very helpful with that. And then that'll help sometimes when I'm feeling, having a little bit in the middle of a die-off reaction. It'll help make me feel a little better. Yeah. So
Nice, nice.
things I've noticed.
Yeah, coming back to blood flow, I think that's one of the components of this that's not discussed maybe enough is that these organisms, namely Babesia and Bartonella, they like to live either in the endothelium and therefore disrupt the blood vessel function, or they make your blood more viscous. And that's these platelet aggregation, fibrin nests, or just the biofilms with the plaques in and of themselves. And this is part of where brain fog comes from because the microvasculature to the brain, to the GI, to the fingers, to the feet is interrupted. And so this is why we can have all these various systems show dysfunction is because there's not adequate blood flow. It's not to say that there's no blood flow at all, but it's just not enough to have normal function, which is why people will often remark, I can't think as quickly as I used to. Or I just, I feel so labored or their gut feels like it's slow. Same sort of thing, not enough blood flow. And then the organ function is somewhat compromised.
Mm-hmm.
We had also discussed hyperbaric at home, a hyperbaric chamber. I'm assuming you haven't started into that yet, but if you
No, I
have
started.
anything, Okay.
I started browsing online, just looking around. So I think we had talked, and that's what's coming next down the pipeline. So I'm looking forward to trying that.
Yeah, I'll share. We had a gentleman 2 weeks ago, chronic fatigue, 4 or 5 years, just so bad to the point where his life was kind of taking a backseat to his symptoms, where he had maybe a few hours of functionality in a day, and then he was just kind of done. And antimicrobials plus hyperbaric really moved the needle for him. And so one of the ways I'm starting to think about hyperbaric is if there's a lot of fatigue and you're suspecting mitochondrial dysfunction, hyperbaric, it really seems to have a sort of time and a place for those instances. Also, we've discussed on the podcast in the past, there's really impressive data with hyperbaric for autoimmunity in the gastrointestinal tract. So if someone has ulcerative colitis, like the PhD you mentioned before,
Mhm.
this might be a nice thing to integrate into his protocol, because the response rate, and this is according to a meta-analysis, was really high, remarkably high. And it can be used with medications. Not that I'm necessarily advocating for that, but when they paired medications with hyperbaric, so pharmaceutical immunosuppressive drugs, the efficacy literally doubled, which is remarkable. So it's a cool therapeutic. And the nice thing about the company that does the at-home rentals, as I know you know, but for our audience, they will mail you a hyperbaric chamber you can set up in your bedroom, your basement, wherever. And that just removes such a barrier to entry, because if you don't have a hyperbaric center 5 minutes away and you have to drive 20, 40 minutes an hour, it's
Yeah,
almost impossible to do an hour to an hour and a half in the chamber and then drive 30 minutes to an hour back and forth 5 days a week.
yeah, yeah. The hyperbaric is exciting, and it's nice to hear that there's some good research backing it, because I become very skeptical about a lot of what I see online, because I've, followed influencers and they weren't able to help me.
Right.
And I know a woman who had long COVID, and the naturopath she had seen for hyperbaric oxygen made it worse. And so, and then I talked to a nurse, and there's no evidence for hyperbaric oxygen, showing improvement for any health condition. So I really kind of had written it off as
Well,
kind of
that's
like
a red, not to cut you off,
new.
but that's a red flag. Whenever
Yeah,
someone says there's no evidence, it's just too strong of a statement.
it is,
Right.
and I've learned that. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's nice to hear that there is research to support it, and there's an order in which hyperbaric can be done. There's an order for all of these things where it can be beneficial. So it's nice to have some clarity there.
For sure. And hyperbaric can flare people. It can cause die off. And this is actually coming to a point I want to echo for our audience, which is in the realm of vector-borne infections. I do think it's worth doing testing. Now, your case kind of violates that to some extent, because I think you're the better case scenario where everything went really well. But for the people who are moderate case scenarios or more challenging, it's just nice to know, okay, are we in this ballpark or not? Meaning, can we confirm at least one of these organisms are present? And if so, then we sort of adjust the rules of engagement accordingly. One of the
I
case in
agree with
points
that.
for that is Babesia. It does seem, at least reported from clinicians, there's no real formal research looking at this yet anyway, hyperbaric done too early might flare Babesia. So this is where the way we've interpreted that, and many clinicians have already sort of taken this lead through observation, is wait until someone's sort of over the hump, kind of where you are, right? Like now you're not very actively symptomatic. We're through most of the battle, so to speak. And now we're thinking more supporting your mitochondria, reducing inflammation, improving circulation, things like that. Because your immune system ostensibly is ahead of, if you do have Babesia, your immune system is far enough ahead of that even if the oxygen from the hyperbaric feeds the Babesia a little bit, because Babesia does like oxygen, your immune system is going to be able to always be ahead of the Babesia, because we're giving your immune system the head start, rather than if it was the inverse, right? And if Babesia was already ahead of your immune system, we'd be supporting both the hyperbaric, but the Babesia would always have that head start, so to speak.
That makes sense.
Greg, what else? Anything as we come to a close? Thoughts, insights that you'd want to share with people, leave people with?
Yeah. as someone who had suffered, as someone who had previously been healthy, active, energetic, and then falling onto a bunch of health symptoms, which include fatigue, brain fog to a point where I had felt dumb, and digestive problems. Like life was miserable, and I felt like I was 80 years old. And I described to people, and I had hammered on this for 7+ years by myself, just trying things that things I find online, and none of them had worked. And so one of the things for me was if I would have given up because I had tried things that didn't work, I wouldn't be in this place today where I actually had found some resolution and feeling hopeful and energetic and like a 39-year-old again. I would be here. So, one of the things is that, don't give up. If you're suffering, just keep moving forward. There's no loss unless you give up.
Mm.
And so that would be a big takeaway from me for sure. And yeah, it's worth it. Sometimes one of the things that held me back from seeing somebody was spending money. I like to be as frugal as possible. For the reason I make my own supplements now, but it was so worth it. It was hard to do, but it's an investment in my life. I thought I was going to have a life of decline, and maybe lose my job in the future. Like things were getting bad, and now it's just the opposite. Like I'm performing well, and I'll probably get raises at my job because my cognitive level is where it used to be. And so like finances, if you have them, it's maybe worth it because suffering is terrible. And, a bright future was worth every penny for me.
Yeah. I mean, well said. You're preaching to the choir, but it's also something I've gone through myself where, I've worked with in my life 2 healthcare providers, and each time it was uncomfortable. And for me, it's maybe a little bit different because I am a healthcare provider, but, nevertheless, I'm not an expert in everything. And so tapping an expert, I just can't emphasize how helpful that can be, because like in our clinic, for example, 3 doctors, a small research team, this is all we do. Every seminar we go to or we attend virtually, we take notes, we interview guests on the podcast, we do all of our independent research, and just day over day, month over month, year over year, this machine of analysis and data gathering is just trying to pull together the best information, when to use it, how to use it. It's really hard to compete with that if you're someone who's just reading some blogs and books on the side, which is a great starting point, right? But to get to that level of expertise on one's own is challenging. So I would just second that, because for me, that was a big unlock also, just tapping into someone who had a lot of skill in this area of vector-borne infections, and just harnessing their 10 years of experience or what have you. So yeah, the best investment you can make is your own health. Yeah.
It reminds me of what I had heard commonly in many podcasts with, well-spoken, intelligent functional medicine or naturopath physicians. And that's, if you're doing it on your own, that in itself is incredibly stressful and taxes the immune system. If you let go, give it to someone else, and just rest assured they're working for you, that reduction in stress is so helpful for healing. And when I had heard that a few times, that was so helpful for me and was one of the major reasons I had reached out. It's like, okay, this is stressing me out. I know the stress is not helping me. And the stress relief I've gotten has been quite profound, actually.
Yeah.
And then there's one last point, sometimes you got to spend a little money. Like, my wife and I, we're saving up for some cars and houses. So it's not the most opportune time, but again, it was so worth it. And I never thought it would be. And boy, I can only think of what would happen if I would have just been, not have reached out, I'd just be.
Yeah. I'm glad you didn't give up. Right. But I know it's trying at times, especially let's say someone did take that step of investing in working with a clinician and it was not the right fit. Or someone, and we see these people, and my heart breaks for you guys. You've seen 2, 3, 4, 5 doctors, and they've all been sort of the same. Well, let's do $5,000 worth of testing and very hard line on diet, and they kind of don't listen. And they might be good at sort of the influencer sort of healthcare, which I judge it partially, but I do think it has a time and a place, right? It brings information to the public. And I think we need that. We need more than just pharma ads on TV for a given drug, right? So we need other people who are charismatic and good at making the case for gluten-free or whatever it is. But what that lacks is sort of being really good at listening to the person and trying to figure out what's going on with them. And so what happens sometimes is people find their way first to the very outspoken advocates for a given healthcare approach. They may not be the best clinicians. And then people have gone through the ringer, spent a lot of money, they feel a little bit jaded. But I would say to those people, just keep searching because there are good healthcare providers out there who listen. I think we all care, but we have different constitutions, right? Maybe I'm not the most outspoken, charming person, but I think I make up for that with listening skills and critical thinking, and I'm okay with that. So yeah, for people who are struggling, I really hope that this discussion and Greg, just your really amazing case helps them. Greg, I don't think you're active anywhere on like social that you want to point people to, but I always make this one of the questions I close with. Is there anywhere you'd want to point people, or is that you want to leave it there?
No, I wish I did. I've actually made an effort to minimize my social media
Yeah,
usage
fair
because I
enough.
find myself scrolling for half an hour and
Fair
endlessly. So
enough.
like, enough of this.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Cool. Well, Greg, thank you again, and I'll look forward to catching up with you in the clinic next time we speak.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks, Dr. Ruscio.